This video is a continuation of the calculator notebook, and I'm going to give you a very brief introduction to using imported math functions and types. In the first section of this notebook, you've seen some examples of basic arithmetic operators and how they can be used for integer, floating point, and even complex values. And now in this section, we're going to see how you can get access to some additional math functions. In some languages, these types of functions are immediately available to you, but that's not the case in Python. Instead, Python uses packages and modules to partition the space of names and functionality. So to use functions that compute square root or a logarithm, we actually need to import them. We will cover modules and import in some detail in a later section, but for now, we're just going to take for granted that if we write from math import square root, then I can use the function square root in my code. So first, when we ran this line, we can see that there's no output. But in the background, what's happening is the interpreter is searching for a module named math, and once it finds it, it looks in that module for the name square root. And if it exists, it makes that function available to us so that we can actually call it like so. Square root of 81, let's say, outputs the value 9, as we would expect. Now, the math module contains a number of functions. And if we wanted to use several of them, it would be really tedious if we had to specify each one of them via an import statement like the one we just used. So instead, we can actually import the entire math module by simply saying import math. And this loads everything in the math module and makes it available for us to use. That includes any functions, objects, names, or whatever happens to exist within the math module. However, with this import, we are required to use fully qualified names, meaning that instead of simply writing square root, as we did in the previous example, you can write math dot square root of 81, where square root is a name or attribute of the math module. That is, we're specifying the module name followed by a dot, and then the function name square root with its argument list. So we're going to cover this in detail in later sections, but it's likely that you'll want to use some of these functions before we get to that point in our discussion of Python. So as another example, I can use the ceiling function, which takes a numeric input and returns an integer that is greater than or equal to the input itself. So if I write math dot ceil and pass maybe 3.3, we'll get the integer 4 returned to us. Now, the description here gives links to the math and complex math module or packages, which both contain the sort of typical functionality one would expect with dealing with these types. And these links also contain lists of the available functions along with their descriptions. So if you visit these pages, you're going to find that there are many more functions than just the two we saw in the examples here. The link here is for some additional documentation on numeric and mathematical modules. And then finally, at the bottom here, we have links to decimal and fraction, which have information on working with correctly rounded decimal floating point arithmetic and rational number arithmetic, respectively.